Yo, I can feel it in my bones. There are some crazy fights that the UFC is cooking up here, and Ilia Topuria is going to be one of them. Ilia Topuria announced recently on Twitter that we're going to be shocked by his next fight announcement. Look at this tweet right here. He says, "We're not going to believe it. Get ready. We're not going to believe it." Now, if he announced he was fighting Shamil Gaziev, that would indeed be shocking. Like really shocking, and no one would believe it, so I guess that fits the bill. But today I'm going to talk about who the actual potential matchups could be and how he'd fare against them. So Ilia Topuria is coming up to lightweight, and you would think that he's probably going to fight for the title, or at the very least, a top contender in the lightweight division. So let's get the obvious matchup out of the way first. I think Islammakhachev would probably be the one that makes the most sense, and it's the fight that everyone's expecting at this point. He clearly wants to try and get a second belt and become a champion in two divisions, even though he vacated his featherweight title. And everyone wants to see this matchup. So I think this would be the most likely outcome. But again, is this something that we wouldn't believe? Is this going to be a shocking announcement? You know, this is the fight everyone wants and is expecting. So I don't know if this would live up to the tweet he's talking about. He's kind of making my head spin at this point. But anyway, who would win this matchup? I would lean slightly to Islammakhachev. I think Islam is very defensively responsible, but we have seen him get into some scraps recently, like against Dustinpoirier. He decided to box a bit and stand on the feet with them, and that was sort of a slugfest. And then also against Volkanovski in their first fight, that was a very close fight, and no, he didn't have as much grappling success in that one. So I doubt that he would just stand with Topuria because Topuria does have different power. And since Islam does have the substantial size advantage, I would probably assume that he's going to try and grapple here and kind of use his weight and his size against him. But Volkanovski did extremely well in their first fight despite being the much smaller guy and carrying much less power than Topuria. So I think it'd be a close fight. I'd probably give Topuria about a 49% chance to win. So it's basically a 50-50 matchup, but this would be a very, very close fight. But I just lean lightly to Islammakhachev. Okay, let's move on to the other potential matchups, which would probably be a top contender in the lightweight division. So the first one would be Charles Oliveira. I think this would be a scrappy slugger of a matchup, although we've seen Charles be a little more patient recently, and I think it's because his chin is starting to fade a little bit. He gets dropped in almost every fight at this point. And even in his last fight against Chandler, despite dominating for like 4.5 rounds, he still got dropped at the end of the fifth and almost got finished. Even though Topuria is a knockout artist at this point, he has a pretty good background in grappling and wrestling, and Oliveira tends to struggle with those types of opponents. Like we saw against Islam on Sarukian, he struggled a lot on the feet with them, and he wasn't as aggressive. But I think with Topuria's power, and assuming this would be a 5-round fight, I would suspect Topuria will eventually find the chin of Charles and probably put him down. Charles gets hit a lot in his fights, and he gets dropped a lot. So you can't take too many shots from Topuria. I'd probably give Topuria like a 60% chance of winning in this one. I would definitely lean him pretty heavily here. But, you know, Charles is pretty big for the lightweight division. I think it would be another close fight. But yeah, I'd give Topuria definitely a more chance of beating him than Islammakhachev. Now, let's move on to the next potential matchup. Now, there's a couple guys more here on the list. Next would be Dustinpoirier. This fight would be an audacious brawl fest where one of these guys' heads will surely bounce off the canvas. I think Poirier would make the most sense behind Islam and Oliveira. Dustin is looking for a retirement fight, and honestly, I don't know if there's a better way to end your career by trying to get a win over the surging superstar in Ilia Topuria. Dustin's chin is still very good at this point, as we saw in the Islammakhachev fight. But man, Topuria seems to have different power, and I think it'll probably translate pretty well in the lightweight division. I would see this turning into a scrappy fight, and I would imagine Topuria's chin will hold up a little bit better at this point than Dustin's. But Dustin still got that DAWG dog in him, so even at 36 years old, he hasn't really lost a step from my estimation. His takedown defense actually looked pretty improved against Islam. I would see this fight as a 50-50. I really would. I really would consider a Dustin pick here if this fight got announced. I think it's one of the harder ones in the division for Topuria. So yeah, I'll give Topuria like a 50% chance of winning this fight. I think it's pretty split down the middle. But let's move on to the next guy. These fights all sound fun, but I mean, they're not really surprising. Like, I don't think that any of us would not believe these matchups if they got announced. Like Topuria was saying in his tweet, everyone seems to be expecting Islammakhachev, so that fight wouldn't really shock anyone at this point. And any fight that's not a championship fight, like against Islam, you know, if they announced Poirier or Oliveira, it would be a little bit less intriguing because everyone's expectations are pretty damn high at this point. So here's what I'm thinking will be the next fight, and there's a couple good reasons for it. I think he might be fighting Conor McGregor next. Just hear me out here. Topuria called out McGregor after the Volkanovski fight, which in my opinion was a dumb call out at the time, but it might not be anymore. This fight could actually make sense now. As a sort of a massive superstar big pay-per-view selling event, this would probably do over 1 million pay-per-views easily. Back in January, Dana White said that there's fight news we will never see coming. Could that be Topuria vacating his belt and fighting Makhachev? I guess it could be, but everyone was already clamoring for that matchup after Topuria knocked out both Volkanovski and Holloway. I mean, I guess it could be John Jones and Aspinall. It could be, but all the fans already knew that's the matchup to make. No one would be surprised at that point. The champion fighting the interim champ shouldn't be shattering news to anybody. Sadly, that's where we are in the heavyweight division, but that's another topic for another day. So these fights, or the fight that Dana's talking about, is not something we're going to see coming, apparently. I mean, he can talk, he does say these things all the time, but he said he has some pretty big things in store for 2025. And Topuria also said that it's something we won't believe. And Dana expects this unforeseen fight to take place in the fall, he said. And he's also mentioned pretty recently that McGregor is saying he wants to make a comeback toward the end of 2025, like around fall time. This would definitely be a fight none of us would see coming, and Topuria called him out. This would also be a matchup that Topuria would vacate his belt for. I mean, many people were saying it could be too soon to vacate the belt, but if he's been in discussions about a McGregor fight, anyone would vacate the belt for that fight. Plus, this is a matchup I think McGregor would want to come back to. You got Ilia Topuria, surging superstar. Everyone compares Topuria to McGregor. I think McGregor would get up for this fight. McGregor wouldn't wake up for a Chandler fight, but he would certainly wake up for this fight. And plus, if McGregor won, he'd be back, and he'd be back in a big way, and he'd be able to get any top matchup he wanted if he won this fight. But still, Topuria against McGregor in 2025, I would give Topuria like an 80% chance to win this matchup. And that might be generous at this point, let's be real. That is, though, if it took place at lightweight. Topuria did say when he called him out that he would fight McGregor at any weight class. And the beefy McGregor we see now wouldn't be able to make 155. So I think this fight would actually take place at welterweight at 170 pounds, which I would still have Topuria winning, but he's pretty small for the lightweight division. So I think that McGregor would definitely have a size advantage over him. And I think Conor's beefy cheeks would still have a chance here. So this fight would definitely shake things up for the UFC. It's much needed. So let's make it happen. Peace.